Well, hello again and welcome to this special episode of Sermon B-Sides. I'm with my buddy, my pal, Pastor Jon. How you doing, Pastor Jon?
Hey, it's a good day. It's a special day for a special episode.
Special day, special episode. One of the things I wish wasn't so special about this day is that I have a very bad sinus flare-up or something with the allergies, so hopefully that doesn't make me sound like a frog throughout the whole episode.
It is definitely getting you. I can tell. I can hear it.
Yeah, so I'm drinking lots of water just because I feel like that helps, and I don't know if it does. So we're actually water, exactly. It's not. This is not gin. This is water.
That's not the water you drink when you read a Russian author to help you pronounce the names.
It's water.
That's water.
Yeah, yeah. So we're actually here today to do a kind of follow-up conversation B-Sides episode on our recent event we had. Building for Cultural Reformation with Dr. Jon West, which we enjoyed. We had a good time. And one of the cool things about these talks, you and I both agree, is that they spur questions, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
Questions that we both agree should be asked and should be worked through by Christians. And I think that a lot of times one of the things we've seen happen in the past is that these things just don't get brought up, so they don't ever get talked about, and we don't come together as Christians to work through them. So this talk was a really great event for thinking through how do we engage with the culture around us as Christians.
Yeah,
and that includes civics. It includes all kinds of volunteeristic opportunities we have to be involved in our community. That's one of the things West talked a lot about is volunteerism. Mm-hmm. So, but one of the things I thought would be cool is we got to have a dinner with Dr. West before the event.
Yeah.
And I kind of wish we would have recorded that because it was a lot of the conversations we had filled in a lot of the gaps that I wish would have been in the talk.
Sure.
So I thought it'd be kind of cool to share our experience having dinner with Dr. West and some of the things we talked about. So how about you? You want to go first?
Well, yeah. So we had some tacos with him and his wife Sonia, who's delightful.
Yes.
And he asked us a little about the church. He asked us about the school we had started, and my big takeaway from that short time of dinner with him was that he's good with history, and when he was explaining. Like he was telling us in the early 80s, you couldn't have homeschool in the state of Washington. Yeah. But now you can. And he told some stories during the evening too, about attacks on marriage that were coming in the early 1800s.
Yep.
And so I find myself often feeling like we've never been here before. And in a sense, it's true that like, I've never been here before. We've never faced this. And in my lifetime, the types of things that we're dealing with, nobody has dealt with. And to be fair, there are things going on that are absolutely new. For example, the sexual mutilation of children is not something we've been through before, right?
There are certain things that are now becoming widespread because of technological advances that have never been here before, like the sex change or whatever they do, the mutilation surgeries.
Yeah.
Right. So
that's a better way to call it.
I think that's a good word is that we've never. It's easy to think we've never been here before, whereas there have been lots of iterations before now. There are unique things, challenging things about our time, but it's not like we've never been here before. And one of the reason he brought that up was he was bringing up the whole Aaron Wren,
the negative world.
Positive world, neutral world, negative world.
Yeah.
Which I actually think is a really helpful paradigm for thinking about where we're at. Yeah. But it's not I wouldn't call it a meta narrative, or I wouldn't call it it's a paradigm that's helpful to see something, but it's not the
whole story.
It's not the whole story. And I think that West was really good in that conversation we had at dinner at kind of giving us explanations for that.
Yeah.
So and what, like you alluded to, we're in supposedly negative world right now, and where Christianity is seen in a bad light and has a lot more cultural opponents against it and that have cultural power and stuff like that.
It's a cultural liability.
Yes. And West was like, but if you think that way, you're going to not see what's happened in the past.
Yeah.
And he brings up the homeschool in the 80s. Like in the 80s, people were jailed for homeschooling.
A guy in Iowa
was
put in jail for homeschooling.
Because he was a Christian who had convictions about homeschooling, and he was willing to take the cost of being jailed, and he was. Right. And one of the things that he said is that's, when we think that we've never been here before, we easily forget the fights that were won in the past in order to get us where we are now.
Yep. He talked. So this was the part that I thought was super helpful. Was he talked about the the sexual revolution that took place in our country in the 60s and 70s, and the kind of the deconstructing of the family, the abandonment of traditional gender roles. He talked about the they call it kind of Marxist impulse that was going through the institutions, and how that rise in immorality led to what was called the moral majority and influential thinkers like Francis Schaeffer. And out of that came reforms. And one of those reforms is our ability to do homeschool today. So you have to see these waves of, you have an uprising in lawlessness and depravity, but then the church is responding. And there's leaders and thought leaders that are, surfacing and leading movements. And so, what that did for me was like, it helped to give hope for the season that we're in, to go, no, we've been here before, and the tide kind of goes back and forth. And as evil has, increased, so the church has increased and has met those challenges and has fought for good change in culture and laws. and we have every reason to believe that that's what's happening right now. We're just at a place in the cycle that we've never been before. We kind of inherited some of the gifts of the last fight, and now we're in a season in which we're the ones that have to fight.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things I think is dangerous about our particular time, and I don't know if this was true back during Schaeffer's time. It probably was to some extent, but broad evangelicalism at the same time when we need to fight, like our forebears did, and blessed us with things like laws to reform homeschooling. Like Michael Ferris is the person he brought up, who I think is the CEO, or I don't know if that's his title, of ADF Legal. The people who did that in the past and who are still doing that now are often in broader evangelicalism hated as culture warriors. Right. And you look back and go, they fought this fight and we are blessed by it. And we'd say that blessing has blessed our children. And yet we're not going to fight today, because to be a culture warrior is a big no-no, because Christians don't do that. And I mean, that's what they'd say. And then also not only are we being taught not to fight, we're also taught to be unthankful for what has been handed to us from people like Michael Ferris, Francis Schaeffer in the past. And I think that is the concern I have for our current moment, because it's very much in the air we breathe to like, whoa, don't, that's like the winsome narrative. Like, don't be a culture warrior because your enemies aren't going to like that. The people who want to, promote transgenderism are not going to like that you're against transgenderism. Duh.
Yeah, exactly.
So that I found that really helpful, because he basically said, there have been fights before. Christians need to fight again. I'm like, agreed.
That's really helpful.
Good.
Yeah. I know. Sometimes to me it just feels like things are getting so dark and it's so difficult, and there's so much opposition, and especially here in the Northwest. We're right outside of Seattle. We are a 25-minute ferry ride away from one of the, you look at like San Francisco, New York. I mean, there's Portland. There's a handful, Chicago, of really, really the cities where things are really bad, right? And we're right next to that, and so that spills over into our community. And so sometimes it can feel like, what's the point? And maybe it's just better to get out of here. Maybe that's, and I'm not saying that's never a solution, but in talking to Dr. West, it was like, no, we've been here before. It's okay.
Yep.
Here's the script. Get to work.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that, you know, and I actually really appreciated his last half of his lecture because of how he gave the normal person a lot of handles for what we can start doing. And I think that it does become very easy to think about things, you know, in a mono solution, like just focus on getting the right person in office.
Yeah.
When really it's kind of like, you've probably heard the saying, you can't fight a culture war without a culture, right?
Yeah.
You actually need to, you need to be a people who are tight enough and together enough that you can do stuff like host parades.
Yeah.
You can do stuff like get involved in people's lives around in the community around you, because if the inability to do that either means you're lazy and don't really care about the work that's required to fight this battle, or it means you don't have a culture. You don't actually, you're not invested. You've kind of become an isolated individual yourself, and you're just kind of like griping as an isolated individual.
Yeah.
So,
and it's like, I think maybe he said this, but you can't go against the enemy playing the enemy's game. Yeah. Right.
I don't know if he said that, but that's good. That's good.
It's like the whole idea of statism is that government is everything, right?
Yes.
And there's a conservative version of that still buys the lie that the government is everything, and we just need to get the right guy in, right? You're still buying the status lie when you function that way. And so the call to build a community and a culture that produces the kind of leaders you'd want to follow, right?
Exactly.
Like you got to think of it that way, because otherwise you're, you still have a dead fish. You just painted it a different color.
The dead fish
and it stinks.
It just goes down the stream, right? It just goes with the flow.
Yep.
Yeah. So you kind of touch on something I think that's important, which is you really do need to cultivate as a people the picture of what you're aiming at.
Yeah.
And you have to cultivate leaders who are built up in this vision. And I think that this is one of the problems, and this kind of leans into the other thing we should talk about from the event, which is the Christian nationalist discussion.
Do it.
In some regards,
go there.
Okay. So this leads into one of the problems, which is I think that a lot of leaders today, and I loved that Dr. West called out Francis Collins, right? A lot of Christian leaders today in the public spaces are being taught to really play footsie with secularism so that they can maintain their status. I don't know, not be viewed as a fundamentalist. I don't know what.
I thought he was very generous in not assigning motives to Collins and but I could.
Yeah. So
I don't know that I would have been that kind, but he actually, I got worried when you brought up Collins because it was under the context of leadership development.
Yeah.
And he goes, we need to have good leaders, leading. And then he brings up Francis Collins. I'm like,
we're all like, whoa,
what?
That guy's not a good leader. Yeah.
No. And then he went after him and
he basically said, he basically said, Francis Collins is the reason we need to be better at leadership development, because look at that cat. He is out to lunch and he's basically fighting for the enemy. Yes. Right. And I think what's happened is a lot of Christian leaders are being taught to basically fight for the enemy if they want to be in politics.
Yeah.
And so that brings up an interesting question, which is the question of what you might call how you function politically. And I think the hard thing is I really want to emphasize the last half of the talk, because I think that's something that more people can do. Right.
Yeah.
There are some people who are called to serve in civics, and I just pray for them. I want them to do it. I want Christians who care about God's word and his law and our communities that feel called to serve in local government and in I think I want to say local government because I think it's actually the most important of the governments, although I wouldn't deny this idea of a national that having a national component. I just think that you have much more benefit from thinking locally right away.
Absolutely.
So, but as we think about what do I want, what should that, how would you go about producing, teaching, training, building up that leadership? And the very first thing I'd want that person to have at the core of their being is like Proverbs type wisdom, right? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Right.
In all your ways, acknowledge him and he will direct your paths. And those things are just so that wisdom from God's word is very contrary to the secular mindset, which says in order to do this, you need to not acknowledge God. You need to not fear God first. You need to fear, whatever. Like, so that's where, when we talk about Christian nationalism, you have what the public is going to say and what they're going to call you if the community around you that doesn't believe in Christ.
Yeah.
And you have maybe what some people on the Christian side, the different versions of what they are promoting, right? And so I would say, so he did bring up Stephen Wolfe's book, The Case for Christian Nationalism, and that book
it should be the case for a Christian nationalism.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I think that's good because I've read some of it. I did not read all of it. In fact, I have a little bit of a allergic reaction to someone who says in the introduction, I'm not going to quote a lot of scripture. I'm going to quote a lot of Christian tradition, and I go,
maybe that's why your allergies are kicking up right now.
Exactly. So it's funny also because a lot of people think that Wolfe is a theonomist, but he's like anti-theonomist to the core. That's why he could say what he said. By the way, if you're listening, you don't know what theonomist is. Theonomist is somebody who believes that specifically like the case laws in the Old Testament should guide our understanding of civic law. So like, and there's different
how do
flavors.
you make a case for Christian nationalism and not be a theonomist?
Yeah, that's the question. That's why I think again, there are traditions here, and a lot of it has to do with whether you think the case laws were meant, God gave us those case laws to do that in every nation, or if he's teaching us, this is how this is how the moral law, which is summed up in the Ten Commandments, gets played out into a very particular context. So for instance, if you're in, our current context, you're not going to have a lot of laws about, calves falling into ditches, right? We're just, because that's very tied to that particular people. But what you're seeing happen there is the application of things we learn in like the Ten Commandments, which are more summary, applied to particular instances.
Yeah.
So, but it'd be foolish to not look at those laws and say there's wisdom here that we can apply now.
I'm laughing because in the last B-Sides episode, we talked about this book, which
that's right. Yeah.
So I'm reading this for September. And anyways, he gets into the whole, those laws don't apply. And his whole argument is like, well, if the righteous standards of God don't change, then his laws don't change.
Exactly.
And the application of the law may change because of a context, but the principle of the law is not going to change.
And I would agree with that statement. And so then Wolfe is more classical Protestant, Reformed thinking. He's very much like he's trying to revert back to like what you might call Christendom 1.0 and how he thinks about a lot of this stuff. And so he does say things that I think are wrong. Like, and Wes brought up some of those things in the talk. Like, he has a whole chapter, I think, on the Christian Prince, and he basically says this. This is, and he's not talking about this as a specific person, but this idea that there could be in the magistrate these authorities to like limit certain things, dictate certain things that happen in the church. I just don't think that that's actually the seat of the magistrate at all.
No, that's a completely different problem. That's a conflation of the spheres that God has ordained, and the distinctions between the state and the church and the family.
Now we would say that there's some minor overlap, right? Because for instance, if someone gets killed during a church service, right? Mm-hmm. The state has a responsibility to deal with that issue in the that happened in the church service.
Correct.
If in our parking lot we have a handicap spot, that is being governed by the state's laws. Correct. There. So there are overlaps, but I would say dealing with like where the communion table is, that is not their business at all.
Yeah.
And
sure.
And it's funny because when Wolf says that, it's I just kind of wonder, like, what does he think of Calvin? Because Calvin fought with the magistrates so much on this stuff because they were trying to do that. And his big point was that you guys don't have authority.
Get out.
Exactly. It's not your lane.
Yeah.
So in terms of the critique against Wolf, I'd agree with those particular critiques.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah. So, and when he brought it up, and he spent a lot of time on the front of the lecture talking about it, what he said, I think, is maybe easy to miss, but really important to like own. And that is, what do you mean by Christian nationalist?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So
yes,
we both know I can't remember what news anchor it was, but it was
it's
somebody
it's a name that's really hard to say. It's like Emma blah, 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 or something.
Yeah. But she works for CNN and
Politica.
Is it Politica?
Politico. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she said that a Christian nationalist is not a Christian, but a Christian nationalist is someone who believes that our rights come from God and not from the state. Regular Christians don't believe that. They believe that rights come from the state. But a Christian nationalist is someone who believes that rights come from God and not from the state. And there's all sorts of problems with that historical. If you read the Constitution, it's very, very clear that our founders believe that we were made in the image of God and he is endowed with certain rights that cannot be violated. And the whole Constitution is meant to protect those rights because government can't create rights. It can only protect rights. God gives rights.
Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, all that stuff. So, was I missing those up?
I think it's the Declaration that talks about the inalienable rights. I'm not sure.
What did I say? Oh, I said the Constitution. Yeah, Declaration. Yeah, sorry. So that's silly, but it's very normal, right?
Yes.
So people are going to throw out the label Christian nationalist, and who knows what the heck they mean. Yeah. And as we were talking before we hit record here, it's like, I don't know that it's worth trying to distance yourself from that label, because it's basically, if you take the Bible seriously and you think men are men and women are women and babies have rights, you're a Christian nationalist. Yeah. And so just own it. Just be like, fine.
Boots on there's a kind of boots on the ground, like the
label is meant to make you shut up. Right?
Exactly. And there's a kind of boots on the ground. What's the word I'm thinking of? Like encouragement that needs to be like, hey, when they call you that, just be like, whatever. Like,
yes.
What does that mean? Does it mean, if it means as a Christian, I want to love my neighbors by having God's law define, whether or not we kill a baby or not? Yes, I will take that label if that's what it means.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like, they're going to call you a theocrat. They're going to call you all these things. And in some ways, we're like, I am a theocrat. Like, I think God's law should be over all of our laws. Now, West did make a distinction between a theocrat as God ruling versus a man ruling and saying what God says. But at the end of the day, anybody who rules is operating in whatever in that seat. They're saying this is good and this is bad, and they are operating in that seat of being the secularist is a theocrat. It's just a secular theos. It's the people. It's the system. It's whatever. Yeah. So it's somewhat unavoidable, but I think it's proper to just kind of own it. Like, no, I'm a Christian. That's where I believe truth and the meaning behind good, right, and wrong comes from. Yeah. So of course I'm going to rule and want laws that reflect the goodness that God has declared in His Word. Mm-hmm. And West didn't deny that.
No, for sure. And I think he made that distinction. Like, if by Christian nationalists you mean we get the right guy in power and you have forced conversions and that kind of stuff, he's like, no, that's a problem. And I think we would both agree, that's a problem. Yeah, but if what you mean is that that our faith and God's word and his laws as revealed in scripture should influence and impact, social policies and laws. For sure.
And if,
like
and
100%.
I would even go so far as the rationale would be, like, why do you, like, at the bottom of why are you against abortion?
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, the rationale gets all the way down to the bottom of, because Christ is Lord.
Yes.
And that's
God said.
Unashamedly, I would claim that as a Christian in the political sphere, and I would want my leaders that we're developing to have that kind of unashamed acknowledgement of God.
Mm-hmm.
So there's
the flip side of that is underneath the arguments, example for reproductive justice, right, which is the murdering of the unborn. What's underneath that, right? What's underneath that is Christ is not Lord.
Exactly. Yep. And I'm Lord. Yeah.
Correct. So you have to own it.
You have to own it. So I think that if there was one critique, and I think that, it would be kind of fun to actually have a conversation with John West about some of these things in follow up. And in fact, Eric Cooper suggested it. He said, we should really get together and have a conversation about it. But I said, if I had one critique, I'd be like, I wonder if the idea of neutrality is kind of holding up some of these your understanding of how Christians can engage in the public sphere. Now, I think that Christians can be kind and merciful, kind, patient, even working alongside. And I love the idea of co-belligerence, working alongside people that you disagree with.
Yes,
but the idea that there is a neutral space where we can just have, no acknowledgement of what the God of the system actually is, or that I don't think is tenable. I think it's better to actually have different groups saying, well, this is our standard of morality. We believe this is the standard of morality. And if there's overlap, great. We can have more shared commonality with that overlap. But we're not going to deny the distinctions that make us what we are. And I think that Christians have been kind of cowed into this because of a myth of neutrality and secularism that sold us a bill of goods that's just not good, which is like, you can actually be secular and Christian. It's like, no, actually secularism it's becoming clear. It actually means anti-Christian.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, one of the questions I would want to know is, or would want to ask is, where is that? Where's the neutral space?
Yeah,
because I don't see it.
Nope.
Like you went to the school board meeting with me. I was like, was that a neutral space?
No,
It's like, I don't know if that space exists anymore. And so the way that you navigate has to be different.
And maybe even as an academic, you see the space where ideas are exchanged as the neutral space, but you're not arguing in a position of neutrality. You're like willing to say, this is what I agree, this is what I believe, and this is why. And I believe this is good for all people. But I think that the problem is that sometimes what often happens, at least at the more boots on the ground level, is that people believe in neutrality is more or less this idea of neutrality is like, you can't actually maintain your position if you think it's because Christ is Lord. Like, you have to actually leave that stuff at the door. In fact, there are many politicians who, on being interviewed, will, they often get asked, if they're Christians, well, how will your belief in Christ shape your your position in office? And they oftentimes will basically just say, oh, I leave that at the door. That's a private thing. And when I come into office, I'm going to be doing whatever I can just for the best of the American people, or whatever. And that's
Joe Biden.
And that's what I want to avoid, like the plague.
Yeah. No, that is Joe Biden. I mean, he's Catholic.
Yep.
Whatever that means.
I know. And that should give Christians even better reason to think of him as somebody who, should be castigated like a brother.
Yeah.
And excommunicated and denied communion.
There you go. So do you want to talk about the kind of the stuff he asked us to consider, like how we work about change, right? And so kind of the front part of the talk was, real change isn't top down. It's bottom up.
Yep.
It's local. Yes, vote. That's not going to change everything.
Yeah, and I will say, I think that real change is bottom up, and I think that it can't be just bottom up. Like you need both, but I think he's right to emphasize the bottom up, because if you don't have a bottom up approach, that means you don't have a culture.
Well,
but
I mean, bottom up versus bottom only.
Exactly. Yeah,
right?
Yeah, agreed.
It's bottom up all the way to the top. That's what we want to do.
Yep.
But it's more of like a starting point.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah. So, what were some of the things that stood out to you in terms of when he was saying, think about these things?
I think that, well, one of the things is that so first off, I love the idea, what was his line? What you celebrate, what was that line he said about what you celebrate?
I remember what you're talking about.
But it's basically this idea of Christians. It made me, it really
like
made me
still.
You inculcate what you celebrate, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sometimes is not understood for how big of a deal it is. Like, Christian celebrations that are open to the public are really important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, it makes you realize, like, how did we get a Christian calendar? Well, whatever it was, it actually is probably a huge piece of what has sustained Christian culture over time.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, like, I, have even more reason to disagree with the Puritans on chucking the Christmas celebrations, because it really does have a impact on the culture around you to celebrate, and and he talked about parades and stuff. And honestly, a lot of that stuff about celebration reminded me a little bit of the principle we often talk about at Coram Deo, which is like worship is warfare, right?
Mm-hmm.
Celebrating what God has done is like moving the battlefield out.
Yeah.
So that parades, celebration, in public spaces where those things are happening, I was like, my brain was ticking on, how can we do that? How can we do that more?
Yeah. Yeah. I immediately thought of all the festivals in the Old Testament to go, oh, actually, this is not a new idea, right?
Yep.
There's lots of festivals. So celebration, but he was stressing the public nature of celebrations.
Exactly.
And I thought that was really helpful, because I do think that there are all sorts of opportunities. Like, I immediately thought of, like, he talked about flash mobs. Remember that?
Yeah.
And I was like, we should do like flash mob Christmas Carol things during the season, right? Publicly.
Totally.
I thought about, we have our 20-year birthday party this summer. And so I've been kind of like dreaming through, how do we do that? But after his talk, I was like, maybe we do that in a much more public way.
Yes.
Like, how could you throw a party and not just have a service where, like, your people are there in a space that is, pretty secluded? How could you do that in a more public place?
Totally.
Public way, more, even in a way that like invites the public in.
Yep. Yeah. I think I love that idea. I think that one of the things I'm hoping is also people who watch this West event see that, those things are actually important. Those have a cultural impact. Because I think that it's easy to think, it's a lot of work for what? Like, it's not, it's not a gospel preaching event, or it's not something, whatever, but it really is important. And I think it really, but it's costly, right? Because it actually, in order to, like, if you had an event where you had food or whatever, like, it costs money, right? If you had an event where you're inviting people into a space where there's fun things to do, that costs money. Like, all those things cost money, and so everybody has to understand this as a tactic in a greater mission,
right? To
saturate Kitsap, with the gospel of Christ, and that there are, So, anyways, I think that was the thing that stuck out to me, is that public celebration.
Yeah, for sure.
But everything he talked about, except for maybe like the development of leaders part, which I think is also important. was very geographically heavy, like not just something, because I think that we really easily just live in Internetville right now.
Yeah.
And so, but actually taking, I would say, like taking dominion of spaces, like doing stuff in particular geographic locations where people are invited in.
Yeah.
It's very easy to not think that way in a post, Facebook world. And I think that we have to think that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So he talked about leadership development and kind of gave Francis Collins and I think probably David French is in that same category. And Russell Moore is trending, examples of epic failures. So we need to be developing leaders. But when I heard that, it's like I transposed it in my head to like a local thing. What does local leadership development look like? And local leadership happens significantly through business. Like businesses influence communities in all sorts of ways. And something that we've talked about as a church, and I've mentioned from time to time in sermons, is like we need entrepreneurs who have a vision for the community, who are creating businesses because businesses shape culture.
Yeah.
And again, that's the long game, right? And that was one of the other takeaways from talking with him. All of the stuff that we're discussing, which is really cultural reformation, is the long game. It's like it's like somebody mentioned this last Sunday. It's like building the cathedrals, right?
Yeah.
And it's like you're talking about generations. That these things don't come to fruition next year, or sometimes even in 10 years. Sometimes you're talking about generations of work and plowing the land and laying the foundation before things actually turn around. But business is one of those things that does shape a community, that can help change a community.
Lots of days of small beginnings, though. Yeah. Because, so for instance, like the school, right? The school, we started Coram Deo Academy, and that's one of the things he pointed out. Is like, this is great that you guys are doing that. And I think that's like businesses and schools in terms of leadership development are huge. But, boy, what does it take to start one? It's not easy. It takes space. It takes money. It takes skilled people to sign up and say, I'm going to spend my time and talent doing that. And but it really, like, you can already see, like, when something starts and what it can become after you plant that seed in the ground, if God blesses it and grants the increase, how that can be a part of forming a culture. And so, but also, like with school, you'll have a direct ability to influence future leaders by starting them very young on teaching them, about Christ and about history and all these things that they need to know in order to walk in the world that they're living in now. That many kids that, today, if you get history from our secular institutions today, you are going to be basically discipled into a version of what they want you to be.
Correct.
Because history is such a big part of that. And so that's I was listening to a guy. This is actually so when I think about the Christian nationalist discussion, which is kind of tied to all this, I think about so there's a Stephen Wolfe book. That guy, I could, I don't agree. I don't like that guy's approach. But there's another guy named Timon Klein, who's the editor for American Reformer. Yeah. And that's the other main guy I think of that is like using that term and whatnot. And one of the things he's a brilliant guy, Timon Klein. He's a lawyer. He is just sharp mind. I might not agree with all of his positions, but when he talks about schools, he says, if you want to know what the dogma of the state is, and there's always a dogma, look at what they teach the kids. Yeah. Look at who's trying to control the schools and what they're trying to teach them, because that is telling you the citizens that they want in their
produce. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the people. It's discipleship is what it is. And so when I think about schools, we're thinking about, we want to make disciples citizens of the kingdom of God, right? So that was a huge part I appreciated too. So
yeah.
So I think that, like, not to pat ourselves on the back, but like we're doing this. It's hard work. We need help. We need people to see that this is a really good endeavor, but it doesn't just happen out of thin air. It requires God's people committing to it.
But I think, and maybe we can land the plane here, because we're almost 40 minutes.
Yeah.
It does tie into the co-belligerence thing that he brought up, that I definitely experienced when we were going through the thick of the local school stuff with the attacks and everything, where it's like people who aren't Christians at all were sometimes being far more kind to me than people who were Christians.
Yeah.
Because people didn't like me saying things that were true. Like, you shouldn't have a cross-dressing adult indoctrinating kindergartners on gender fluid. Right. That's just ridiculous. What world is that okay in? And, some believers were opposed to that. But then I've got people who aren't Christians who are reaching out and are like, thanking me. Like, thanks for doing this. This is really important. Right. So there is this co-belligerent. There are these people that maybe share some of the same values, but don't have the same convictions and worldview. Yeah. But I think by starting a school, I think that you start to draw some of that, because there's people in the community who can look at the districts and go, this is crazy. Right. And I don't know why it's crazy. And I'm not yet convinced of, I'm not yet a Christian, but I know that you guys are doing something good. Yeah. And we're really drawn to that and drawn by that. Yeah. And maybe at some point want to be part of that.
Yeah. And I think, and that's because some of this did come up in the meeting with Dr. West beforehand, this idea of the natural law. Like, God has built the world in such a way that there's a grain to it. Right. And to be formed more and more like Christ is actually to be more and more in with the grain of how God has created all things. Yeah. Right. So there are people who understand that grain, who reject Christ, and who know that the grain is good, but still reject Christ. Right. And this is these co-belligerents. Yep. And so what they're seeing is like, you guys are going with the grain and you have a bunch of reasons for it. Like, and you have conviction about these reasons. And you can see that because you're making these courageous acts in the middle of clown world, where you're going to get like, hated and called names and
all sorts of names.
Be accused of bomb threats and stupid stuff like that. Like, and that takes courage. But it takes courage that comes from a conviction that we know the one who makes the grain, right? And we love the grain. We want to go with the grain. And so clown world is rejecting the grain because it rejects the person who made it. But there are a lot of people who get it. They will like, I think that we want to go with the grain of how things are made, but they don't know, or, they haven't been brought into the kingdom yet. And those people, I think, are, when Jesus looks at the fields ripe for harvest,
they're right.
Those are the people that pray for more laborers, because not to say they've somehow worked themselves up to be like better qualified, but like there's hints there that that's a ripe harvest.
Well, Jesus talks about like the tax collectors and the prostitutes like are closer in line than the Pharisees, and so what he's saying is there's something about where they're at that connects with the kingdom and the gospel more easily than the Pharisees. Yeah. And I'm not saying people who aren't Christians who appreciate what we're doing are tax collectors and prostitutes, but I'm saying you can be a little closer to the way things are and still not be a believer and be drawn to it.
And I think that's one of the reasons why we want to continue to maintain laws that reflect that grain, because and Joe Rigney refers to that as pre-evangelism. Yes. In fact, he wasn't the first person who said that. That was what a lot of the reformers, the post-reformed, like guys who were, making the confessions and stuff. Mm-hmm. That's what they believe. Like the law functions, the natural law functions as a kind of prerequisite for understanding the gospel call. And if you lose that, it becomes or if the suppression of that becomes so intense like it is now today, it does become very difficult to even communicate the gospel message to people, because like you say, you have sin. Like, I don't even know what sin is. Like, they're denying it. It's not that they don't know it, because they know deep down, but they are they have all this, not just their own personal weight, but all the cultural weight around them, also suppressing down that truth.
Yep.
So, hey, fun conversation. We really did enjoy the Dr. West time. He's an awesome guy. His wife was awesome. Really, and I think it's important to say it's a good conversation starter, and that as Christians who might have differing opinions on this, we should be willing to hear each other out, think through this in a very loving Christian way, because there are complex positions
for sure,
but we should also understand, like you said, like, you're going to be called a Christian nationalist if you just act like a Christian in the political sphere, in any way, shape, or form in the cultural sphere around you. Yeah. So don't be, oh my gosh, they called me like, no, that's just par for the course.
Yeah.
Keep going, keep moving, keep proclaiming Christ as Lord, keep loving your neighbor, acting in all those different ways.
And shameless plug for Dr. West. He's a brilliant guy, and he's produced documentaries and written books. You can go to his website. I think it's that's johnwest.com.
Is it johngwest.com?
John G. West. I should have figured that out before. Are you looking it up?
I'm looking it up. It is johngwest.com.
Okay. And while you're there, go look at Human Zoos. It's a documentary. It will blow your mind. Yeah. And he's got all sorts of other work on Darwin theory and how that affects civilizations and culture, and really, really great, helpful stuff. So go check it out.
Cool. All right, everybody. Cheers. Until next time, trust Christ, go to church, and love your neighbor. Peace.
See ya.
See you later.